So this is the Habit of Mind journal app project that we accepted and cloned before break. Um, and the first thing, so there's a bunch of code already here for us, and we're going to add some more as we go. Um, so don't worry so much about what all these things are yet. We're going to explore each of these in turn as we build up our web application little piece by little piece by little piece. Um, what we're going to start with is this file server.js. Um, think of this as like the main method in like a Java program. This is similar to how we're going to set up server.js. Often you'll see other examples or tutorials where they call this app.js. It's serving the same purpose. So we're going to create our own web server, which will be cool. This is a great way to start. And Node makes this surprisingly easy. So let me show you a little bit about Node, and then we're going to jump into writing a few lines of code. So Node.js is the JavaScript runtime that we use for our server. Okay, so this is like the web server side of things. And Node has a couple of useful features. It's a JavaScript runtime, meaning it can run our JavaScript code, so we certainly care about that. It's event driven, so we're going to be like defining methods that get invoked when certain things happen. Like the user goes to a certain URL related to our server, and then it runs a certain function that we've written. It's very asynchronous, which is good for the responsiveness. We got into this a little bit in the past with like async await type stuff. It handles multiple concurrent connections, which is super important for a web server because think of the bus app, right? So there's like hundreds of kids loading the bus app at the end of the school day. If every time one person connected from their phone, everyone else had to wait, that would obviously be a problem. So it handles multiple concurrent connections, and it's all really built around HTTP, which is that hypertext transfer protocol that we explored conceptually last week. We'll come back to Express here in a moment. So let's do some basic Node stuff together to get a web server up and running. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the HTTP module. And this is the thing that provides an HTTP server. You'll notice I have a GitHub Copilot on now. That was your homework over break, was to get Copilot through the GitHub Student Developer Pack, get it enabled and installed. Here's my happy Copilot icon down here, showing that everything is up and running. This is going to help me a lot because we looked at comment-driven development last week. And so I wrote a comment that says, import the HTTP module, which provides an HTTP server. I hit enter, and Copilot writes this line of code for me, which is exactly what I want. So I'll hit tab, and I don't even have to type it, which is great. And then I'm going to write another line of another comment. This is not what I'm going to do, but I am going to say import the Express module, which exports the Express function. So again, I write my comment, GitHub Copilot writes the code, which is great. That's exactly what I want. I just hit tab, I accept the Copilot thing, I don't have to type it, I hit enter. See how much time this is saving us? It's amazing. All right, what do we do next? So we're importing different node modules that we're gonna need. We imported HTTP, we imported Express. We'll talk more about Express in a second. We're just gonna use a little bit of it now. We're going to invoke the Express function to create an Express application. I like that. It's even writing the comments for me. Great. Const app equals Express. Perfect. So we imported the Express module and specifically a reference to this Express function. That's what we assigned to the variable Express here. Here, because now we have the parentheses after Express, we're invoking the Express function, which returns a reference to our Express application. We'll be doing a bunch of stuff with that application throughout the rest of our code. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to create the HTTP server. And this code is perfect. Yeah. So when we require the HTTP module, it returns a reference to this HTTP object. On that object, we can invoke the create server function. We need to pass a reference to our Express application to connect the Express application to the HTTP server. It returns a reference to our server object, which we can use later to actually start listening on a port like we learned about last week. If you look at other Node like tutorials, they don't often do this step, this part where we require HTTP explicitly or explicitly create the server. There are more straightforward ways to do it. We're doing these extra steps because several days from now, we're going to learn about a technology called WebSockets. And for WebSockets to work, we need a reference to the actual HTTP server. So that's why we have a few extra lines of code today, because it's going to set us up to do more advanced features later. So just to explain that if you've seen other examples. All right, now we have a server. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use our Express application, and we're going to actually start to specify what functions get called in response to certain events. And the way we do this is we use the get method on the application object. So with that, we're going to pass a path. And remember, the path is the thing after like naperville.instructure.com/. It's the thing after the slash. So we're going to pass a path. So for example, our path might be just a single slash. That'd be like the root of our web server. And we're going to pass a callback function to the get method. And then when the client, so by client, I mean the Chrome browser, right? The user using Chrome to connect to our web server. So when the client makes an HTTP GET request, okay? So I know it's been like a week almost. GET request is when the client is requesting like the web page from the server. We also learned about post requests, which is when the client is sending data to the server and it's going to update some state on the server. But a GET request is just send me this web page. So when the client makes an HTTP GET request to the specified path, the callback function is executed. All right, this is close to, this is usually a more common situation with GitHub Copilot. This isn't quite what I want, but it's pretty close. So I'm going to hit tab to accept it. And then I'm going to go back and just fix it, like edit it the way I want it to be. So we said we were going to pass two things. We're going to pass the path. Here's the path. It's just the slash. That's the root of our web server. And we're going to pass a callback function. Usually we don't write that function independently. We use the arrow function syntax like I have here. The callback function takes two parameters, rec and res. Rec is short for request. It's the HTTP request that is being made by the client. And res is short for response. It's the HTTP response that the server sends back to the client. So these are the two parameters we're going to use a ton, rec and res. We read stuff from rec because it's the request, and we set stuff in res because it's the response. And then in between these curly brackets is the body of the arrow function that will be invoked when we actually get a client request for the root. So let's actually add a comment here explaining some of this. So when we look back at this later, we remember what it is. The rec parameter references the HTTP request object which has, whoa, okay, that's a lot. We're just going to say has a number of properties. We'll explore them later. I'm going to say console.log rec. Actually, let's just look at the path for now. We'll say path, and then we'll log rec.path. There we go. We can explore the entire request object, but really I just want you to see what the path looks like at this point. And then we'll say the res parameter references the HTTP response object. On that object, we can call a method like, or a function like send, and that's actually the response we're going to send back to the client. So we're going to send the string hello world back to the client. So to be clear, this is where that asynchronous stuff comes in. When this file is executed, it is going to import the HTTP module and assign that to a variable or assign the reference to the object. Same thing with express. It does invoke the express function here to get a reference to the app. It does invoke the create server function here to get a reference to the server. All of this code, none of this code runs yet, right? We're invoking the get method on the express application. And just basically, this is like a add event listener type stuff from Java. We're saying when the client connects to this endpoint, the slash, this is the function that gets run. But it's not running now. It's only going to run when a client connects. Okay. Last thing we need to do is we need to actually start the server. So the server listens on a port. Start the server on port, let's do 8080. And this code looks great. So we're going to invoke the listen method on our server object. The first parameter is the port on which we want to listen, meaning when the client connects to the server we're about to run, it needs to specify a port of 8080. And then this is the function that gets run when we actually start the server, and it just prints the server started on HTTP localhost 8080 so that we know our server is up and running.